Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something pretty profound. You know, in times like these, with global crises everywhere you look, climate, inequality, tension, how do you tell a real reformer from, well, someone just pretending?
It's a critical question. Societies often look for guidance in crises, spiritual or otherwise. And our sources today, they draw on the Hindu tradition of the Kalki avatar.
Right, Vishnu's final form prophesied to arrive at the end of this age, the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, essentially.
Exactly. An age marked by conflict, decline, unrighteousness. Kalki's whole mission is to end that and begin a new era, an age of righteousness or dharma, an age of abundance, some sources call it.
Okay, so that's the core idea. Kalki is the ultimate renewal figure. But the sources are really clear. Crisis always attracts charlatans. So our mission today is to use this material to figure out the criteria, the sort of litmus test, to distinguish the true Kalki, the genuine reformer, from the fake Kalki, the pretender.
And the really striking thing, the central thesis here, is that the ultimate test isn't about, claiming divine power or having charisma.
No. What is it then?
It's about having a concrete, actionable, systemic roadmap, a plan to actually dismantle humanity's biggest problems. The spiritual prophecy basically becomes a very specific policy checklist.
So if we strip away the spiritual terms for a moment, what are the real stakes for us, for you listening, when we're looking at modern leadership?
It really comes down to survival, doesn't it? We're facing existential threats, medical, environmental, military. If a leader claims to be a savior but offers, frankly, nothing but words while the ship is sinking, well, that claim is pretty worthless.
So the real reformer needs the courage, the vision, to actually transform things across the board.
Yes, we have to look past the slogans and demand to see the blueprint, the detailed plan for a genuinely different world.
Okay, let's unpack that blueprint, starting with the foundation, the social realm. I mean, if a leader can't fix the problems within the human family, how can they claim to fix the planet, right?
That's exactly the logic. Our sources argue a true reformer has to confront these really deep, ancient societal wounds, the things that just crush human dignity.
And silence is basically an automatic fail.
Silence is the immediate disqualifier. The very first test is confronting these injustices head-on. A false leader, they'll hide, maybe behind big national stories or abstract spiritual ideas, while the actual fundamental pain in society just continues. Often because, that existing pain might even prop up their power.
The sources really zoom in on one issue that, well, it's global, but often gets sidelined as just a cultural problem.
Yeah.
Dowry. Why is that specific custom such a key test for a supposed universal reformer?
It's because dowry represents such a total failure of dignity and equality right down to the family level. The sources flag it as one of the oldest social evils, still crushing women's dignity and equality today.
So if someone claims they're bringing in a new age of dharma, of righteousness,
But they have no specific plan, legal, educational, actionable to abolish this deep-rooted structural evil, then they're fundamentally failing the mission right there. It's maybe an easy evil to ignore because it's cultural, but the true reformer has to show the courage to dismantle harmful traditions, no matter how embedded they are.
and that failure, that inaction on dowry, it connects directly to the bigger picture of safety, doesn't it? Violence against the vulnerable.
Precisely. You look at the culture of violence against women, against the weak. The pretender just tolerates it. They might give sermons condemning it, sure, but often those are just hollow words.
Whereas the true reformer,
The true reformer has to introduce concrete systemic changes. That means legal reform, yes, but also things like rapid justice systems, cultural programs designed not just to punish violence after it happens, but to actually abolish the societal conditions that let it thrive in the first place. A real age of righteousness has to start with everyone feeling safe, truly safe.
but the sources suggest the problem goes even deeper than just individual safety. It's about the actual structures of division. They talk about failing to address systemic inequality, caste, class, privilege, that sort of thing.
This is absolutely critical. If a leader claims to be a universal savior, a uniter, but leaves these entrenched systems of inequality completely intact, systems separating people by birth or wealth or status, well, they're just preserving the core structures of the Kali Yuga.
And the fake Kalki might even benefit from those divisions.
Often, yes. They might rely on them, exploit those existing fault lines for political gain, maybe offer some, token reforms that don't actually challenge the hierarchy at all. The true reformer, though, has to articulate a clear vision and a concrete plan for eradicating these structural barriers, for genuine socioeconomic equality. Anything less is just, managing division, not ending it.
Okay, and the last piece in this social realm test. They talk about needing to uproot moral vices. What are the key internal weaknesses a true leader needs to actively fight? And how does that show up in policy?
We're talking about the kind of moral decay that underpins societal failure. Things like pervasive greed, systemic corruption, unchecked lust or desire that damages communities. The sources are blunt. The fake leader often feeds these vices, either through their own behavior or by enabling corruption for, say, political funding or control.
So the true reformer needs a plan for what? Moral policing.
Not policing, but elimination of systemic corruption. A plan for complete eradication, not just going after the odd offender, but creating systems that make grand-scale corruption virtually impossible. It's about building a foundation of moral integrity, recognizing that public greed inevitably poisons policy and destroys public trust.
Okay, so Section 1 covered the internal decay, the social fabric. Section 2 is where this framework gets really wild, I think. The sources argue a true savior has to tackle threats to existence itself, planetary, geopolitical stuff. I was genuinely surprised to see issues in here that sound like they're straight out of a, 21st century science report.
It really shows the timeless relevance, doesn't it? A genuine avatar, a true systemic reformer, must have a clear, practical plan for these global existential challenges. If you ignore them, the Age of Darkness just continues no matter how nice the speeches are.
Let's start with one that many people might not connect immediately to spirituality or even politics. Antibiotic resistance, AMR.
Yeah, the inclusion of AMR feels very prescient. The sources highlight this as a massive looming medical catastrophe. The WHO backs this up without urgent global action. Untreatable infections could cause millions of deaths annually. We could be heading back to a time where a simple infection is a death sentence.
And the sources say?
They're unequivocal. A false leader offers no plan to prevent millions of deaths from this specific science-based crisis. The true reformer has to champion global health strategies, push for massive pharmaceutical reform, demand international cooperation and oversight to manage this. It's a huge systemic failure, and it needs a systemic cure.
Okay, beyond medicine. Literally the air we breathe.
Yeah.
The sources talk about the environmental crisis of toxic air pollution.
Right. While the pretender might be preaching salvation, they're ignoring poisoned lungs. And this isn't some abstract future problem. It's daily reality for billions. You see it acutely in places like South Asia, Delhi, Dhaka, Kolkata. The air quality index regularly goes way over 500. That's officially hazardous.
It literally shortens lives.
Absolutely. It stunts development, causes chronic illness. A leader claiming ultimate authority but failing to articulate a rapid action plan against this immediate deadly threat through things like industrial regulation, a real green energy conversion, traffic reform. That leader is engaging in fundamental deception. It's a basic failure to care for the population.
And then, of course, the big one, global warming,
Gap.
the climate emergency.
Identified as the most critical existential threat. The sources kind of suggest that if the Earth is metaphorically scorched by unrighteousness in the Kali Yuga, well, then the literal heat of climate change is the ultimate physical proof that the fake leader is failing.
So, ignoring melting glaciers, rising seas, ruined farmland.
It is unforgivable. The true reformer has to champion rapid climate justice, massive investment in green energy, sustainable global governance. This isn't just one policy area among many. It's presented as a fundamental moral obligation to future generations.
Let me push back a bit here, though. Don't most major leaders talk about climate change now? What makes the true Kalki policy different from the rhetoric we hear all the time?
That's a really good question. The key difference is scope and urgency. The fake leader might offer, modest goals decades away, or pledges that rely on the poor making sacrifices while maybe still subsidizing fossil fuels or avoiding tough calls on industrial polluters.
Whereas the true reformer,
their roadmap demands immediate, radical, systemic change, like achieving carbon neutrality within a generation, whatever the political cost, making sure climate justice is woven into every single economic policy. It's about revolutionary commitment, not just incremental tweaks and delays.
Okay, the final existential test in this section, preventing World War III. The stakes don't get higher than that.
No, they don't. And if you connect this to global governance, the sources point to the insane amount of money spent on militaries, over $2.4 trillion globally in 2024. The highest ever. We're living under the shadow of more than 11,000 nuclear warheads.
The madness.
It is. And this threat of total annihilation, the sources say, can only be averted through very specific strategic methods. Things like enforceable international law, radical diplomacy based on real justice, genuine global cooperation. If a leader lacks a comprehensive roadmap for lasting peace, one that includes restructuring global power and disarmament, that's seen as definitive proof of inauthenticity.
So it sounds like the true reformer has to be willing to actually dismantle the war machine, not just broker temporary truces.
Absolutely. The argument is the age of righteousness simply cannot dawn while nations are spending trillions preparing to destroy each other. The true Kalki needs to establish a global security framework based on shared prosperity and justice, fundamentally removing the incentives for conflict.
But the mission isn't just stopping disaster, right? It's also about establishing this age of abundance. What does that actually look like beyond just, say, GDP growth? Yeah.
The true age of abundance isn't defined by just accumulating wealth for a few. It's about shared well-being. The sources argue it needs visionary economic reforms, harnessing new technologies like AI and automation, not to displace people, but to eliminate drudgery and provide a universal basic dignity for everyone.
So new economic structures.
Exactly. Maybe more decentralized structures that ensure prosperity is genuinely shared, instead of just managing the current system where you have extreme poverty alongside extreme wealth concentration. The fake Kalki leaves these huge structural economic failures completely untouched, basically just managing scarcity for the majority. Okay, so moving beyond the physical survival of the planet and its people, the sources then detail these deep spiritual and cultural divisions that plague humanity. And the core requirement here is really clear. A true systemic reformer has to unite people, not exploit the divisions that already exist.
Right. So what are those specific internal fractures that the fake Kalki just lets fester or maybe even makes worse, weakening society from the inside?
Well, they're pretty pervasive. The sources start with basic moral decay. Things rooted in addiction, like the conflicts driven by widespread alcohol abuse, or other addictive behaviors that just wreck families and local economies.
Okay. What else?
Crucially, the focus is on deepening religious strife and linguistic strife, ethnic strife. The false leader either actively fans the flames of discrimination, using existing hatreds to consolidate power, or they just silently ignore these deep divisions, hoping they'll go away or maybe not wanting to alienate certain groups.
While the true reformer,
by contrast, has to actively unite all faiths, all communities under a banner of universal dharma and justice. Unity isn't just presented as a nice ideal, it's a policy imperative. You have to actively build bridges.
one specific structural issue comes up again and again: gender inequality, particularly the lack of financial independence for women. Why is that detail considered so crucial for the whole roadmap?
Because economic vulnerability is like the hinge upon which so many other social evils turn. The sources really emphasize this. A financially independent woman is seen as a key lever for transforming the whole society.
So if a leader ignores women's economic situation,
Their lack of opportunity, safety, leadership roles, they're basically perpetuating systemic weakness for half of humanity. When women lack financial freedom, they become disproportionately vulnerable to things like dowry demands, domestic violence, political marginalization.
so the true reformer needs policies for.
Structural policies, things
Yeah.
like guaranteed financial inclusion, real access to quality education, maybe even quotas for political representation, like aiming for 50% as a foundational step toward a truly righteous age.
And then there's the issue of personal moral decay, what the sources call the exploitation of desire.
Yes. This points to destructive social behaviors, things like rising extramarital affairs, or just the general misuse of material or personal desire that fragments families and communities. The argument isn't just that these are private ethical failings. They're seen as symptoms of a deeper spiritual sickness, a loss of integrity that the fake leader fails to cure. Instead, they might even let base instincts run rampant if it serves them.
Whereas a true reformer fosters integrity.
A culture of integrity and responsibility, yes. It's about the overall health of the society's moral compass.
Okay, so if we pull all these threads together now, the social failures, the planetary destruction, the cultural divisions, the sources seem to say that they all point back to one single root cause, which brings us to the ultimate test of gold.
This is really the definitive test, the linchpin. We have to remember the foundational story of the Kali Yuga itself. The sources cite that moment when the age supposedly began. King Parikshit gifted Kali, the personification of the age, a house of money and gold.
So that act basically established greed, materialism, corruption as the bedrock of this declining age.
That's the narrative, and it leads directly to the ultimate defining sign of a fake Kalki: the inability, or maybe the refusal, to provide a roadmap to end the tyranny of money and gold itself. They might try to manage the system, tinker around the edges, but they won't dismantle the core incentive for greed.
Because without fundamentally tackling greed and corruption as the foundation of society.
Exactly. No one can genuinely claim to be bringing in a new era. The fake leader might talk a good game about spirituality, but they preserve the very tools of exploitation, the murky political funding, the systemic bribery, the unchecked accumulation of wealth that's totally divorced from service to others.
So the true Kalki has to
Establish radical transparency, dismantle this whole system of capital-driven self-interest, shift society towards one based on service, dharma, collective well-being. That's presented as the single highest hurdle, the ultimate proof.
Okay, this framework is intellectually really powerful, but we need to see it grounded. And our sources actually provide some pretty stunning modern data to show how these spiritual tests play out in a very concrete political way. Let's apply this roadmap test using real-world stats.
Yes. This is where we can rigorously measure the competence, maybe even the authenticity of modern leadership against these huge existential necessities. It moves us past just listening to rhetoric and lets us demand actual accountability based on results.
Let's start with the environmental collapse we discussed. What are the hard numbers that back up this claim that the Earth is, well, burning, proving the current system is failing this test?
The data paints a really urgent picture of failure. You look at the IPCC warnings. Without immediate drastic action, we're on track for a 1.52 degrees CCT temperature rise this century. And we're already feeling it. 2024 was the hottest year ever recorded, 1.4 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. This isn't some far-off problem. It's happening right now.
And the potential human displacement is just mind-boggling.
It's staggering and, frankly, heartbreaking. The UN estimates over 200 million people could become climate refugees by 2050, driven from their homes by drought, rising seas, ruined land. Just imagine the scale of that human crisis, the political instability it will cause.
And then there's the local impact, like the air quality issues.
Exactly. Look at the sheer human cost of South Asia's airpocalypse. Major cities frequently seeing air quality index levels over 500. That's not just smog, it's hazardous, life-shortening pollution that's being tolerated by leaders who claim to care about their people's well-being.
So the litmus test here is immediacy. If a leader has, say, a 5-year plan for the economy but a 20-year plan for clean air, they're failing.
Precisely. The true Kalki, according to this framework, champions immediate revolutionary policies on green energy and climate justice. The fake leader, meanwhile, keeps offering salvation rhetoric while the population literally chokes and the planet burns. The roadmap has to show they recognize the atmosphere as a shared resource that simply cannot be poisoned for short-term profit.
Moving to the social test, the status of women. Often seen as a clear measure of any society's moral health. What's the data tell us about how we're doing on this ancient injustice?
The statistics are still pretty horrifying, honestly. The UN's 2024 report says 1 in 3 women worldwide experiences violence in her lifetime. That reflects a fundamental societal acceptance, or at least a tolerance, of really brutal power dynamics.
And the specific data on dowry violence seems crucial here, validating the source's focus.
It absolutely does. In India, for example, the data showed over 20,000 reported dowry-related deaths in just 5 years, 2018 to 2022. That's essentially structural murder driven by greed.
Wow.
And you couple that with low formal labor participation for women globally, only around 49% compared to 74% for men, and you see how violence and economic dependency just reinforce each other in a vicious cycle.
It's a tragedy, especially when you contrast it, as the sources do, with the historical context, like the respect given to female thinkers like Gargi and Maitreyi back in Vedic times.
That historical contrast is key. It argues that the current oppression isn't some inherent state, it's a regression, a symptom of the Kali Yuga's decay. So the test for a modern reformer is about reversing centuries of that erosion.
Which means?
The true systemic reformer has to ensure financial independence, absolute safety, and full political opportunity for women. The sources even point to Rwanda, where women hold 61% of parliamentary seats, not as some distant dream, but as an example of a practical, achievable step towards radical empowerment, ending the marginalization of half the population.
Okay, back to the root cause.
Yeah.
The tyranny of money and gold. Just how massive is the economic cost of this institutionalized greed today?
This number really needs to sink in because it sort of ties together almost every other problem we've talked about. The World Bank estimates that corruption costs the global economy. Wait for it. $3.6 trillion every single year.
Let me just stop you there. $3.6 trillion annually. That amount of money. I mean, that could fund a massive global green energy transition and solve the antibiotic resistance crisis, probably with change left over.
Exactly right.
So the fake Kalki, by tolerating this level of corruption, is effectively choosing it over solving world hunger and climate change.
That's the implication. The failure isn't just fiscal, it's profoundly moral, even existential. And the sources highlight the mechanism: opaque financing. Transparency International consistently ranks regions like South Asia among the worst for perceived corruption. The sources cite specific data points, like 80% of political funding in India being non-transparent. This system of hidden money allows the House of Gold to keep going without any real accountability.
And history teaches us this kind of internal rut collapses empires, right? Rome, the Mughals.
Integrity is the bedrock of stability. So the test for a modern reformer becomes, do they establish comprehensive transparency? Things like digital governance, public tracking of finances, fierce, truly independent anti-corruption bodies. We can look at examples like Estonia's digital systems or Singapore's anti-corruption success. The true reformer, the sources argue, moves definitively toward a cashless, fair society where money is just a tool for service, not a weapon for exploitation.
All right, our final existential test. Global annihilation. What's the concrete evidence that the world is actually sliding towards catastrophic conflict, proving the failure of current geopolitical leadership on this front?
Well, we're undeniably in a highly volatile period. Global military spending hit that record $2.4 trillion in 2024. The sources point to ongoing, devastating conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine war, over 8 million refugees created by that alone, plus escalating tensions in the Pacific, the Middle East.
And the nuclear threat hasn't gone away.
Not at all. We live under the threat of over 11,000 nuclear warheads held by just a few major powers. This is the very definition of the Kali Yuga's potential for self-destruction.
And the historical warning is just how fragile peace can be.
History provides terrifying proof. We came incredibly close to nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. World War I, a massive global conflict, was triggered by a single assassination. Ancient texts like the Mahabharata detail this cycle. Unchecked ambition leading inevitably to complete mutual destruction. The true reformer's task, therefore, is nothing less than preventing that final, total annihilation.
So the test boils down to, is the leader exploiting divisions or actively, systemically building justice as the foundation for peace?
That's it exactly. The fake Kalki exploits old grievances, beats the drums of war, justifies massive military spending as just necessary security. The true Kalki, according to this framework, must prevent global annihilation through radical justice, binding international dialogue, and establishing a fundamentally new world order based on cooperation.
And the sources give examples.
They point to radical ideas, like Costa Rica abolishing its military back in 1948, as a guiding philosophical principle. Imagine shifting those trillions spent on war towards education, health, climate stability instead. That's the kind of systemic shift envisioned. #OTRO.
Wow. This has been a really necessary and, I think, quite profound deep dive. What these sources seem to reveal is that, in a way, ancient prophecy and very practical modern policy evaluation become one and the same in this ultimate test of leadership.
They really do. The true Kalki isn't defined by grand claims or saying, I'm divine. They're defined by the sheer comprehensiveness, the feasibility, the integrity of their policy roadmap.
So the ultimate call to action for listeners is?
Vigilance. Critical engagement. We have to stop being perhaps easily fooled by illusion or rhetoric and start demanding measurable results. The true measure of any leader is whether they have that concrete, systemic, actionable roadmap for our collective social, environmental, and moral future.
If they talk about a golden age but have zero plan to end the current darkness?
Then they are, by this definition, merely a pretender capitalizing on our anxieties and our despair.
Okay, let's quickly recap those non-negotiable solutions that define the true systemic reformer, according to these sources.
Right. The true reformer provides clear, actionable solutions for 1. Systemically ending things like dowry, violence against women, and all structural social divisions based on birth or wealth. 2. Tackling the planetary health crises immediately and head-on. That includes antibiotic resistance and the climate emergency. No more kicking the can down the road.
And 3.
3. Fundamentally abolishing greed and corruption through absolute transparency and actively preventing global war by building a new world order rooted in justice and cooperation. The core idea, really, is that integrity isn't just a virtue, it's the only viable universal policy.
And here's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, drawing directly from the material. If the Kali Yuga truly began with that symbolic house of money and gold, then the only way to genuinely usher in an age of abundance might be to fundamentally restructure our society away from the dominance of capital and greed and towards transparency and service. So think about this. What specific systemic change, maybe in political financing or local governance, or how justice is delivered in your own community, would serve as your powerful litmus test for true change? A change that goes beyond just slogans and gets into real, tangible policy. We have to demand the roadmap. Otherwise, we risk following an illusion into even deeper darkness.